Members of the committee, my name is Darren Goins. I'm the state director for the National Rifle Association, and applaud you guys for nobody being brave enough to ask Frank a question, so spare us the answer. So Frank does a very thorough job of covering all the fine minutia of these bills, so I usually wait to see if he missed anything and then try to hit those points, but he didn't miss much. He didn't miss anything that I can see. So I'm going to come at it from a little bit of a different angle. I've listened to all the testimony in another room tonight and heard what everybody had to say, and I always find it interesting. I've done this for, I've done it for NRA for 13 years in 9 states. So I've sat through a lot of these hearings in states that range from pro-gun states like the Dakotas that are now constitutional carry or permitless carry, to states like New York and New Jersey that have some of the most restrictive gun laws in the country. So I've kind of seen it all. Before that, I was a legislative staffer in Colorado. I was out there at the time of Columbine. I lived a few short miles from Columbine the day it happened. Never forget, we were at a caucus lunch, and I worked for the senator that represented the district, and we got the call at lunch, and things unraveled from there. But you know, the only reason I bring that up is it kind of segues into what I want to talk about, and that is, you know, everybody says, well, we do nothing about gun violence. You know, nothing could be further from the truth. If you look at the Gun Control Act of 1968, if you go back even further, we passed gun laws. You can't be mentally ill and have guns. You can't have substance abuse problems and have guns. When Reagan was shot, we passed the Brady Act. After Virginia Tech, we passed the Nix Improvement Act. We passed bump stock bans. We passed bill after bill after bill every time one of these things happens. And so what's going on? I mean, when we think of school shootings, you know, when I walk into this building, I saw, I mean, there were clearly a couple thousand at least yellow shirts here today. And you listen from the speakers from both sides. And I don't begrudge anybody that comes up here, no matter which side of the aisle you're on, or which side of the issue you're on, because that's the great part about this country, is we're here to express our opinion, exercise our First Amendment rights, and everybody clearly, this is one of the more polarizing issues, and everyone has a different way to approach it, and I can respect that. But I also try to look at it from a different perspective, and that is, all those people out there with yellow shirts, are they all childless? I mean, I don't like to get into my personal life, but I have a kindergartner. I drop him off at school. If you don't think this stuff crosses my mind, you don't understand me, because it does. But at the same time, a lot of the testimony that we heard absolutely amazes me, because what I heard is that if there's an active shooter situation, what you should do is hide. And then the second option is wait for a law enforcement officer because they're trained. Now, let's pretend that we're not under armed security in this building, because we are. We're fortunate enough to have state police and probably several other individuals with firearms in this building protecting us. But let's pretend we're not. Let's pretend we're in a school or somewhere and we're in this building. Where on earth are people going to hide in here? And you're going to wait for a cop to show up? How long is that going to take? I got to tell you, I would rather take a chance that Frank had his CCW. I really would. If a guy came through there with a firearm, I'd rather take the chance that Frank or anybody else in this room had a CCW than to hide or wait for a cop to show up because he had more training than Frank, which I don't even know that that's true. So you look at the school situation, and we've passed all of these bills, and they keep happening. Why do they keep happening? Because we keep passing bills and only passing bills. We don't do anything to look at the root problem, and that is actual safety. Airports. 9/11 happened. They killed a lot of people that day. What was our response to that? Nobody even heard of TSA before 9/11, right? We completely changed the way that we dealt with security in airports. Yet in schools, when I was in Columbine 20 years ago, we deal with schools the same way we did 20 years ago. Some of it's changed, don't get me wrong, but I mean, for the most part, We refuse to put school resource officers, armed protection in schools. A lot of schools, and granted some of it is fiscal, but we don't look at things like bulletproof glass. We don't look at construction materials that are designed to stop penetration through sheetrock and stuff like that. Just simple layout of schools, where the doors are, cameras, controlled access to the building. I mean, when I dropped my kid off the first day at school, I found the youngest cop there and I went and talked to him and said, "Are you guys around here much? What do you do? How do you get in the door? Is this locked? Who watches it? What about access to the building?" I mean, those are the things you should look at. Not passing bump stock bans, not passing almost all of the stuff that is on this list, because you know what? That's the same thing we did after Reagan was shot. That's the same thing we did after Virginia Tech. That's the same thing after Columbine. And clearly none of it has worked. So we need to start thinking about this stuff very, very differently. And until we do that, we're living in fantasy land to think this stuff is going to stop, unfortunately. And all of us are just as concerned about that because we have children. You know, I'm not one on statistics. A lot of sides bring up statistics, especially late at night. It makes all of our eyes glaze over. You can manipulate statistics. It depends on who does the study, et cetera, et cetera. But there's a couple things that I pulled out of the research and the stuff that I've read before I came in here, because the first part of the evening was about cops versus citizens. Cops have training, citizens don't, or at least that's the narrative. So I remembered a study I read, and it was by John Lott, who is an economist. He's a professor who's worked at several Ivy League schools. He does gun research. So what's the best way to look at this? It's to compare the two subsets, the concealed weapon holders versus the police officers. Because we've all picked up the newspaper and we've seen a domestic case with a cop who shot his wife, or he did something wrong, got a DUI, embezzled, whatever. Cops are people. They break the law. They do bad things, right? So if you look at the misdemeanors and felonies that cops commit versus CCW holders, and that's exactly what Mr. Lott did. And he looked at that at Florida and Texas. And he picked those two states for a reason, because they have a lot of concealed carry permit holders, and because Florida was the first state that passed it. So they've got a long experience with it, right? So the thing that they found out was that police officers committed misdemeanor and felony violations at a rate of 16.5 per 100,000. Pretty good, right? 16.5 out of 100,000. Cops have a good record. In fact, it's better than the general population. So what about CCW holders? Their rate was 2.4 out of 100,000. 6 times better than the police officers, right? Now, the NRA is the largest training organization in the country. We train counselors. We train people to train people. We train law enforcement. We even do some military training. There's a lot of training in gun safety that we do. And I can tell you that there are private citizens out there, competitive shooters, that shoot just as many rounds, that are just as well trained as police officers. And like I said, if someone comes in this building, I would take my chances with any one of those guys in yellow and their CCW versus me hiding under your desk. And that's just a fact. And unfortunately, if that ever happened in my kid's school, I would have absolutely no problem with a teacher who has a CCW or anyone else, a principal. And you don't even have to have a person with a CCW. You just can't hang a sign on the door that says nobody in here has one, right? There are a lot of districts that park vacant cop cars outside the school because it creates uncertainty to stop some of these things. But the way it works now, these people come in buildings, they come in theaters, they come in classrooms with impunity. And when I hear that we're passing magazine capacity bans under the notion that somebody is going to tackle an active shooter, okay, that's great. So, give me an example, right? When's the last time one of these people was shot because they were tackled reloading? The few times they were tackled, very few times, it was probably because the gun jammed, right? And it was probably because the high-capacity magazine forced the gun to jam. I mean, so it's just ridiculous. So I live in a state, New Jersey, and all the stuff that Frank brought up about these guns, the unintended consequences. This stuff is the beginning of what New Jersey now has. For example, on the youth bill, there was a good example of That's how that leads to reasonable deviation. You can go to and from the range. You can go to and from hunting. But what if all of a sudden I have a flat tire, or I need to go to the bathroom, or I run out of gas, need to get gas? That's why New Jersey has a reasonable deviation problem, is because of bills that are poorly crafted like this. And we don't want to go down that road. And, I told you, I did a lot of states. I had continued to do a lot of states. And the thing is, every time these gun bills are written, there are mistakes after mistakes. And you know why? Because they're written about people who know nothing about firearms. And I mean, that's just the honest truth. I mean, Vermont, let's just consider the magazine ban that they passed. They didn't exempt non-resident law enforcement. So if there is an incident on the Vermont-New Hampshire border and New Hampshire police come into Vermont, guess what they're carrying? They're not carrying 10-round magazines, and they're now in violation of Vermont's gun ban magazine. And we had to fix that. In New York, they passed background check requirement on ammunition so that when you bought ammunition, you had to have background checks. You can't do background checks on ammunition because the only way you can access the NICS database is for firearms transfers. That's it. They didn't realize that. I can go on and on with examples in states where they've had to come back and fix these bills, and arguably some of the stuff that we've done here on DV and red flag, they have problems in that we're living with too. At the end of the day, and I'm going to wrap this up, nobody has a monopoly on the emotions. No one has a monopoly on concern. No one has a monopoly on how much you love your kid or I love my kid. None of us want to go to a baseball game. None of us want to go to the mall. None of us want to go to school and suffer any of these things. The difference between our two groups, the groups of people that are for guns and the Constitution and protection versus the people who purport to be for gun safety. I mean, that's what they say, so I'll take their word for that. The difference between those two groups is how we approach things. And there are two ways to approach things. There's pass more bills and then go to your constituents and tell them you did something. But if you think passing one more bill is going to stop one more of these things, I can tell you I've got 100 years of recent history that proves that that will not be the case. And until we start treating our schools, our malls, our public places like airports with different types of security and different types of thinking, we're never going to get to the root cause of these things. And because of that, I would respectfully ask you to oppose all the bills that Frank asked you to oppose, support the two that he supports. We're in complete agreement. And I think there's one or two others that we're neutral on, which he referenced. But again, I know this stuff is a tough issue. We're going to be here late. People are going to say a lot of the same things. I've hoped that I've not done that. And one final thing, 16 was an important number. I wrote down 16. You know why? 16.5, the cops I was telling you about? Well, there's 16.3 million concealed carry weapons holders, and there are now 16 states with constitutional or permitless carry. And what does that tell you? If all of these examples about the wild, wild west, and I've heard these stories for 20 years about how you borrow a shovel and you get in a disagreement and you go to the neighbors and you got a gun, and it doesn't happen. There's 16.3 million CCW holders in this country. Their safety record is on par with law enforcement. And I would absolutely trust my life and my kid's life to one of those people being in this room rather than hiding under your desk or waiting for a trained law enforcement officer to show up. And with all, and I guess with that, I would avail myself to any questions the committee may have.
Thank you, Darren. Any questions for Darren? Representative Roberts.
Thank you. Are you implying, because it almost sounds to me, that because of this push to take away our Second Amendment rights, it is causing states, and I've read of them, about them myself, it's causing more states now to turn around and just give everybody the CCWs? I mean, that's what I'm seeing going on. Are you seeing that?
Mr. Chairman?
Sure.
Representative Roberts, I think what you're seeing, I mean, that's part of it, but the basic premise of this is the safety and the track record has been so good for almost 30 years now since Florida first adopted their carry permit statute. The record has been so good that some states have just said, listen, if you're not a federal prohibited person, you can carry a firearm. Because those states have opted not to go after the law-abiding citizen. Those states are passing tougher laws on the criminals and going after criminal use of misuse of firearms. And listen, if I mean, we're going to find out, because I was just reading in 2017, there were 12 states. The number of states that are passing this is going up exponentially. And where in the news have we heard about any of these people doing anything inappropriate? And I think the statistics clearly bear, again, I don't want to get into statistics, but I think just anecdotally, you can see that the safety record of CCW holders has bared itself out. Listen, in a lot of states, I mean, this is talking about the permit process now, but you have to get a background in New Jersey. I mean, you're talking HIPAA requests. You have to get 2 recommendations from people. Fingerprinting, they obviously do a NICS check. I mean, you're seriously vetted. Some states have training requirements, some don't. Some of them, the training requirements differ. But, I mean, these people are vetted, and the safety record has led to states trusting citizens, and that movement has grown.
Okay, so I think maybe I should have better stated it. You stated it you did a really great job. So I think that's kind of what I was getting at, was that because of all of the violence that we see going on, and the push to take away the gun rights, what's really going on is that it's causing more people to turn around and want their concealed carry permits even more, because we have seen where there have been many instances, I've seen a lot, or have read a lot, of instances where being trained on a firearm and having a firearm on you in a bad situation can sometimes fend off an attack and save other people. So I think that's important, because if you don't have a way, I mean, clearly, look, here in the State House, right, we have Capitol Police here. They're armed to take care of us, right? So if we're entitled to that, why aren't our children? Our children should be number one here. We should stop at nothing to protect them, because we can't just, if we disarm the police officers in the schools, right, the resource officers, they're an open target. Anybody can walk right in and make, my grandkids victims, and I don't appreciate that. So I think we've made some good points here. Thank you.
Completely agree.
Thank you. Any further questions for Darren? Representative Ella Wilkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Darren, have you looked at, on the assault weapon ban bill, did you look on at the issue that if the owner of the grandfathered assault weapon dies, that the weapon suddenly becomes property of the state? I was surprised that I didn't hear either you or Frank talk about that. Could you address that, because that has me very concerned?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Representative Ella Wilkinson, that is an issue, and unfortunately, I mean, that's an issue that comes up a lot in other states that have passed these types of restrictions. And in fact, in Vermont and New York, they're trying to clean that up. I mean, New York will never pass that fix to it, but it's clearly a problem. And then the additional thing that I would like to bring up is that, okay, so the person dies, and now you have to turn it over to the state, but if I'm not the person who it was registered to, and I'm transporting it to the police station, I am now in violation of transportation and possession. And so these are the exact gotcha types of scenarios that all of these anti-gun states struggle with. And all it does, and I look back, we passed a magazine ban, and I had several people ask me what they're, and the only reason I say that, it's the same issue, right? Banning magazines, banning the rifles, and they work the issue works the same. And what happens is, I know several women who bought one gun. They have the 2 factory magazines, came with it, 15 rounders. They bought this 5 years ago. Now all of a sudden you're passing magazine bans. They're not into shooting. They don't follow this stuff. They've had it in their closet the entire time. Now they are a felon in that particular state. And the other type of person that gets wrapped up in these gun laws are the people that you're talking about, and that's when Grandpa dies. And Grandpa bought these guns 40 years ago, and now all of a sudden they're deemed illegal overnight, and the family's left to sort the situation out. And unfortunately, the answer to your question is, the family is in jeopardy in many cases for simply transporting and possessing the firearms. And again, that varies from state to state.
Any further questions for Darren?